Welcome everybody to today's webinar on the European Commission's recommendation for the new Charter for Researchers. We will have two speakers, Michele Rosa-Klott from the European Commission, who will present the main features of the newly published recommendation for the Charter for Researchers. I will put the links into the chat after this. And this charter will replace the charter and code that was originally published in 2005. Professor Renaud Jolivet will also give his experience or present his experience of representing researchers on the ERA Forum, that's the European Research Area Forum, and how the European Commission integrates the views of stakeholders into policymaking. So without further ado, I will ask Dr. Michele Rosa-Klott, the Portfolio Manager for the Human Resources Strategy for Researchers, HRS4R, at the Directorate General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission, to present his work and his management of the process that led to the new Charter for Researchers.
Thank you, Brian. For starting, a small disclaimer, I work as a contractor with the European Commission. Therefore, my presentation when it comes to policy, I will not be able to speak in the name of the Commission, but everything that you will see in this presentation is perfectly reliable and state-of-the-art. So this presentation will focus mainly on the Charter and Code and the Charter, but I will need to mention, of course, the context in which the new proposal for the Charter is taking place, which is the proposal for Council recommendation called for short the framework for researchers. This presentation, of course, the full-blown presentation includes also discussion on HRS4R, but for time reason, this will not be included. In any case, if you have questions also on the process of implementation of the new charter, I will be very happy to try to answer to all your questions. Do I manage to switch my slides? Yes. Okay, very fast. As Brian already mentioned, the Charter and Code was issued in 2005 as a recommendation from the Commission. And what you see in this slide is its implementation process, which is in place since 2008. It's called the Human Resources Strategy for Researchers. I would briefly like to mention the fact that until the digitalization and the introduction of the strengthened HRS4R procedure in 2017, it was possible for an institution to endorse the Charter and Code without entering into the process for its implementation. Since 2017, endorsing by itself is not possible anymore. It is necessary to endorse and commit, therefore starting the HRS4R process. What was the Charter and Code? I will do a small digression on that because it is necessary to understand what the 2005 version was and why and how it has been changed. As you all know, the Charter and Code had two legs, one direct addressed to the researchers and one addressed to the recruiters and the funders for researchers. And it was articulated in 4 pillars, 4 thematic areas: working conditions, social security, recruitment, training and career development, ethical and professional aspects. These 4 thematic areas were articulated in 40 principles. I will not go through all the 40 principles. It is quite interesting for us to mention that the principle on working condition did not explicitly include mental health and well-being. It was, at the time, it was kind of understood that fostering positive working conditions for researchers would have also involved improvements and facilitate a good environment for researchers, well-being of researchers, but it was not explicitly included. This is an important, I don't want to say omission, it was an important lack from the text, from the letter of the charter and code, because as we know in times closer to us, the issue of mental health and well-being became apparent and went on the forefront of the political discussion also. In the course of the existence of the charter and code, starting several years ago, it's not a novelty, but in particular with the years of COVID, let's say from 2019 onwards, it became absolutely apparent that there were a certain number of problematics. Most of them already discussed, but everything became converged, let's say, in a momentous acceleration of the debate. The first one, of course, as you know, is the context for research careers, doing transition, the pandemic, the issues of the war in Ukraine, etc. But also a discussion that was coming from a bit far away. That was the realization, the awareness that there are important skill mismatches between what the academia creates, develop, and what the private sector needs and develops and needs. In doing that, it was observed also that there was a very big problem in awareness of skills within the academia. This matured into the discussion on how transsectoral mobility can be fostered. New challenges for researchers. Well, these challenges, whoever has been or is a researcher knows very well that they are not new challenges, but they became more visible at the political level. The fact that precarious working conditions have objective negative effects on attractiveness of career and on mental health and well-being of researchers. The skill provided to doctoral candidates are very often focused on the academia only. As I said, the private sector and the small enterprises, they have different needs, but from the point of view of the researchers, this has an additional problematic. The fact that the researchers are not aware of the skills they have, are not aware of the fact that many skills they have can be used actively and powerfully into sectors different from the academia. And very few researchers or even PhD students, let's talk about our one, are aware of the fact that only a portion of them will find a position in the academia, and they will need to look also outside the academia, and the skills they will be able to accumulate and to nurture and to refine in the years of their formation will also be useful outside the academia. And of course, the role of a higher education institution, which is not exactly the object of what my unit works on, but we of course have to take also that into consideration. All this debate generated several policy positions. We are talking about the council conclusion of the Portuguese presidency, for example, all the work that the council has triggered on the revision of the charter and code, putting in place work from Iraq task force. There were studies like the ERA Priority 3 study on knowledge ecosystems that was commissioned by the European Commission and was published in December 2021. All that was orbiting around a single point, that is the debate on the preparation of a European framework for research careers. To do that, several consultations with stakeholder member states took place, and the final output of that was the Commission proposal on the framework with two annexes. The Annex 1, which is a new, more comprehensive set of definition of R1, R4, with a special attention also to the sectors beyond academia, and a second annex, which is the new, let's call it in the working jargon, the new charter is actually called only the charter. Now, the framework. In a few words, I will not get into many details, but the framework, first of all, the legal form of this framework. What the Commission adopted last July is a proposal for Council recommendation, which means, speaking about its annexes, in particular the code is not yet into force. I will get to this point in a second. But at this moment, all this material has been transmitted to the Council, and at this very moment, everything is discussed within the Council in working parties, in strong and close interaction with the Commission on this point. The framework for researcher is tackling a number of issues, going from a clear definition of researcher, which, like in the old charter and code, stems from the Frascati definition, meaning that a researcher is any creator of new knowledge in all. We are speaking of all fields. This Council recommendation in our proposal, now in the Commission proposal, is directed to all researchers, STEM, SSH, arts, etc. We are proposing in this proposal the strong element for the recognition of the research profession, and we are stemming a number of proposals going from career development to support action for research careers. I would like to focus though only on the charter, which is the topic of our discussion. So now that's exactly where we are now with this recommendation, with this Council recommendation. The European Commission has worked on the preparation of the proposal for quite a long time. The procedure itself for adoption by the European Commission College took a good semester, and then it has eventually been adopted in mid-July. I insist, what has been adopted is a proposal for Council recommendation. Now, this is, I don't know if it has been just transmitted or it will be in the upcoming weeks. It will be transmitted to the Council formally, although the discussion have already started. It will be transmitted to the Council, and then the Council recommendation will be adopted, if all goes well and as planned, by the end of 2023 in December. We still do not have a clear date, but if everything goes well, should be at the first half of December. Also, of course, the second half, it will be a holiday period, so it is not viable. Now, revision of the Charter and Code. Let's get into the Charter and Code more specifically. The revision of the Charter and Code comes from far away. As a matter of fact, when I met Brian the first time, I was in Nantes at the Eraxis conference. This was already in discussion. It was a year ago, more than a year ago. It was in discussion, and still in a form that required a lot of discussion. There are a number of inputs that informed the discussion on the charter, on the new charter. As I already mentioned, the Iraq task force, called also the Triangle task force because it involved 3 standing working groups: open science and innovation, human resources and mobility, and gender. Gender requires a discussion per se because it's a political priority now. The study on ERA Priority 3, I will provide you with links to it in case you haven't seen it yet. And inputs from independent experts who are already involved in the implementation of the Charter and Code. And the, let's say, the beacon that informed all our discussion is what at the time when everything began in this to be discussed 2 or 3 years ago was what we want to take into account are the human resources and mobility trends, a better formulation or putting into the forefront open science, and to put in the forefront science. Gender. To do that, you see on the right side, there were a variety of additional input outside the commission. Also, let me mention specifically 2 which informed our debate on mental health. It was, of course, the inputs we received from many sources at the URAX Biennial Conference in Nantes, sorry for the typo, which had mental health as one of the important topics, central topics at discussion. And the second one is the fact that in the State of the Union address in 2022, von der Leyen explicitly mentioned that a new comprehensive approach to mental health was necessary. The revision process was based on two main pillars. The first one, of course, as I already mentioned, the introduction, the update, the strengthening of the Charter with new policy measures that became important and were needed to be implemented in the last few years. Recognition of the profession, inclusion in the private sector, gender equality, in the formulation of gender equality. Now the gender equality plans are considered an important component to be assessed during the assessment process in the HRS4 process, etc. And then the second one I didn't mention yet is streamlining. Why? Because we realized working on the Charter and Code that there were a number of repetition, and some principles could be merged, and some principles could be better explained. Therefore, agreeing with the recommendation of the Triangle Task Force, the number of 40 principles was reduced to 20 principles. The number of principles in the Charter, the new Charter, is reduced to 20. I will get to this point in a second. And the last point was that for many institutions, the Charter and Code was supposed to be a practical document, and the form it had created some difficulties. So in the rewriting of the new Charter, we kept in mind that this should be a practical document used by the institution to implement the principles that are described. This is the structure the new Charter in our proposal, in the EC proposal, has been transmitted to the Council. As you see, the 4 basic pillars are, even if they're phrased differently, they're the same, absolutely unchanged. Only 4 principles. In the small right column, I listed the 20 principles on which it is articulated. Now, what has to be made clear, and I always underline this point, is that the number of principles has been halved. However, no principle of the original Charter and Code has been excluded from the new Charter. These 20 principles are sort of 20 headlines under which sub-principles, or they are better articulated, to find what the 40 principles were the charter and code. I would like to make an examples, let's say working condition in open science. In working condition, we find the diversity principle, the principle which include non-discrimination, which includes, let me move to the second slide, which includes for the first time explicitly now, well-being and mental health. As you see now here, I put just these two principles in recruiting working condition. In the original charter and code, it was not explicitly mentioned. Now we have it mentioned both in the council recommendation itself, the framework for researchers, and under the principal working condition and in pillar 3 of the new charter. What this is the overall situation. Now, the two questions, I'm sorry, maybe I will get it into the chat or later on, but I would like to anticipate that the two questions I am always getting since the adoption of the proposal are, shall we start work taking into consideration the new charter? And the second question is, what happens to the institution we already endorsed and committed to the old charter? What happens now that the new charter is into place? Well, the answer is that the charter will be adopted finally only in December. For the moment, we have a proposal of council recommendation. So, of course, you can peruse it, you can quote it, you can, as a proposal of the commission. The final version, I don't know if between now and December changes will be done by the council, but the only version that will be used by the institution will be the one adopted by the council in December. What happens to those institutions who already endorsed the charter and code? What happens with the new charter? Well, there are provisions right now in the framework for researchers saying that the adoption of the new charter is without will not create any prejudice to the institution who already adopted it. So an institution who has endorsed the charter and code, let's say in 2019, will not have to endorse the new charter. This will be considered in continuity. The same for those institutions who are in the HRS4R. They will not need to redo their work for the submission within the HRS4R process, but they can conclude the phase they are in. I'm just speaking a bit in jargon-esque, but it's for those institutions who are already in the process. They can conclude the phase they are in with the charter and code, and only at the following phase they will be submitting an internal review under the new charter. Sorry, I put two animation. Okay, here is my last slide, and here you can find some documents I already I quoted during this presentation. In particular, two on the right side column. The first one is an important study on your priority 3, on which we based a lot of our discussion on the rewriting of the charter and code, and finally, of course, the proposal for council recommendation. That's the official text that you can find on your Lex. Thank you. In addition to my private address, you can write, of course, to RTD Charter, which is the functional mailbox for the charter and code, the new charter, and the HRS4R. Thanks.
So thanks very, very much, Michaela. We will now move on to our next speaker, who is ReMO Jolivet. ReMO is a professor at Maastricht University, newly appointed last week, I believe. So congratulations to him. And he will speak about his experience of giving feedback as part of consultative processes and through serving on the ERA Forum, representing the Marie Curie Alumni Association, as well as setting up many, as well as through many of the other researcher organizations. So please, ReMO, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for the invitation. I've been in Maastricht for 2 years. Just my inaugural lecture was last week. Yeah, so I didn't prepare any slides, but I thought maybe I can keep this short. So I've been engaged, aside from my academic career, I've been engaged in science policy since I got involved with the Marie Curie Alumni Association. And about 2 years ago, this led me to be nominated to the European Research Area Forum, which is an idea or a concept that has existed since the early 2000s, but it was restarted by the von der Leyen Commission effectively 2 years ago in a relatively new format. So what is this ERA Forum? It's basically a forum where the member states, the associated states, a number of other bodies are invited together with the Commission to discuss science policy at the European level. And part of the people who are invited to discuss science policy at the EU level are the so-called stakeholder representatives. There are 7 groups that have been defined by the Commission. So universities, founding bodies, national academies, research performing organizations, research infrastructures, think about things like CERN, and also research intensive businesses, and also individual researchers and innovators, which is the so-called stakeholder group for which I sit in the forum. So all these different group of stakeholders are invited to participate in the forum, to participate in the activities of the forum, or the activities that derive from activities of the forum, but also to propose and discuss a policy agenda. So the group that I represent really is coordinated by the Initiative for Science in Europe, and it contains additionally the Marie Curie Alumni Association, where I was very active, Eurodoc, the Association of ERC Grantees, and Euroscience. I also don't do that alone, actually. I share this responsibility with Agnieszka Wykowska, who is a professor at the Indian Institute of Technology in Genoa, Italy, and also at the Lula University of Technology. So we share these duties together with Agnieszka, and we participate in this forum to discuss science policy. The way this is organized is that there's a policy agenda for 3-year cycles. So the very first one started basically last year at the beginning of 2022, and will run until the end of 2024. And then there will be a subsequent cycle from 2025 to 2027, which will coincide with the end of the Horizon Europe program. The portfolio of action is actually very broad. So what has happened so far, last year, the Commission made a number of proposals for potential policy actions. There was essentially a extensive debates between the stakeholders and the member states and the Commission to decide which actions really should go forward. Some actions were dropped, some actions were merged, and eventually we converged onto an agenda of policy actions that contains, if I'm not mistaken, about 17 different actions. They cover a very large range of things. So, the green transition, interactions between the European Union and other large research blocks in the world. So I would say there's a foreign affair component to it, but there are also actions that are specifically targeted and interesting for early career researchers. Because the portfolio is so broad, we had to focus on things that we thought were directly relevant to us. So as a representative of individual researchers and innovators, but also where we had some expertise. So there's a number of things on, hydrogen economy about which none of us really had any expertise. So we decided to basically not be involved in these activities. The actions that we are focusing on relate to research assessment or reforming research assessment. Some of you will know that there's a so-called COARA coalition on the reform of the research assessment that has taken off partially as a result of this action. There's an action on attractive research careers. There's this action on the global approach, so how Europe is interacting with other foreign partners. There's an action dedicated to bringing science closer to citizens, and there's an action on the EU-wide access to excellence. Additionally, the European Commission has launched something that they call the multilateral dialogue, which is not directly related, but adjacent to the ERA forum, which is, the idea of this dialogue is to discuss with foreign nations around values that are important, values in research that are important, and to try to have multilateral dialogue with many foreign partners. I'm not directly involved in this, but one of us, so Matthias Giraud, who is the representative of Eurodoc in our little group, is actually involved in this multilateral dialogue. So the first year, basically last year, has been heavily focused on discussing this policy agenda, narrowing it down to what everyone would agree was important and needed to move forward. And now we have moved into the implementation phase. The implementation phase of this policy agenda is very diverse. So there's a number of mutual learning exercises to which the stakeholder representatives are not invited. This happens between the member states. There's a number of working groups and workshops. So it's pretty diverse. It depends a bit on the content, specific content of the action. Some of the actions are more advanced than others because some of the actions co-opted pre-existing policies or activities that were now reunited under this new umbrella. But some actions were relatively new, so they are a bit, I would say, delayed in implementation, or they are not as advanced in implementation with respect to the others. So it's a lot of work potentially because there's a lot of workshops and activities that are organized. So it is, while I sit in the European Research Area Forum together with Agnieszka, and I also sit on the subgroup on the global approach, most of the actual work is involving other people from from our organizations, so Eurodoc, Euroscience, the Association of University Grantees, MCA, ISC, and so on. So we've nominated a number of experts to some of these actions. We've nominated experts. There's an action on academic freedom. There's an action on gender equality where we've nominated experts from Eurodoc, for instance. So there's a possibility, if you're a member of one of these organizations and you have expertise in one of those areas and you are really interested in participating in one of these things, there are possibilities to be nominated as an expert on our behalf and to participate. Which I think is a great opportunity if you're an early career scientist or even a scientist, an established one, to really understand how policy work, how these policies are being implemented and how these kind of actions operate at a transnational level in the EU. What else did I want to say? So the first year and a half has been mostly an opportunity to get to know how the process would work. I must say that the European Commission drove a pretty insane pace in 2022. This was set up without really any kind of process with respect to how the forum would operate. So a lot of the processes had to be worked out on the spot. And so it was a pretty insane pace, and it was very hard to follow and to give valuable input at this stage. Also, we didn't feel that there was too much scope to really provide a lot of input into these actions because they came as sort of pre-packaged products, and a lot of them were, at least conceptually, already pretty advanced in their design. But now we are actually talking about we are already talking about the next policy cycle, which is going to start basically in a bit more than a year and run for 3 years until the end of Horizon Europe. And so we've actually made a proposal for a specific action that we propose should be dedicated to fundamental research. I mean, the stakeholder group 4 have the lead on this together with the Guild of Research Intensive Universities, which is part of the stakeholder group, the Universities Network. And we've received expression of interest from Norway, Sweden, EU Life, and also Science Europe, which is a body that, if you're not familiar with them, unites most of the largest national funders in Europe. So we are pretty excited about it. So and I think it shows the interest of participating into this kind of fora, is that as it started, we didn't have really a chance to do too much. But now that we know the processes and that we've been involved in this for a year and a half roughly, we actually have an opportunity to really shape the policy agenda, we hope. We don't know if this action on fundamental research is going to be adopted, of course. But if it was, I think it would be a great example of how you can be involved as a scientist in policy decisions at the European level and actually have an impact. So I hope this is going to work. Some of the questions that we would like to address within the context of this action is to look at data on the balance of top-down versus bottom-up research funding. So whether, where is the right balance between directing research from the top or leaving researchers propose their own path. We also want to have a look at, if possible, the economic impact of fundamental versus applied research. And finally, we would like to address the question of baseline versus competitive funding. In my personal opinion, competitive funding is important because it drives competitiveness to some extent, but I think we've overshot the optimal point by quite a wide margin. And we need to return to an era where some of the money, at least, is distributed as baseline funding to really allow people to take risks or to conduct research programs over long extended periods of time, without having the need to write a new grant every 3 or 4 years. The idea behind proposing this action is to provide data and input hopefully early enough so that this can enter into the design of the 10th framework program, which is going to start in 2028. But we would like also if some interesting things come out of this analysis, if this action goes forward, we also would like to invite the member states to reflect on this data and to maybe redesign some of the research the funding vehicles that they use. So I think I don't want to take too much time. I think in a nutshell, that is it. And I think it's really, I just want to make one last point that I think is really important, is that it has been a very functional process. So the people at the European Commission and within the member states, I think are really, it is a friendly environment, and everyone really wants to get the best out of these programs and out of this process and the best for Europe. But often the people who are involved in making these kind of decisions in research ministries or at the European Commission, they don't necessarily have a research background. They don't necessarily have a PhD. They typically train in international relations or political science or economics. And they don't really have, they don't feel in their guts what it is to be a young scientist today in Europe. And if we scientists, we don't make a stand and take the step to really be involved in these processes, we are basically leaving other people to make these decisions for us. And it's not always optimal. It's not always optimal because these people are often very disconnected from I would say, the ground reality of doing research in a university today in Europe. And so I think we need to be more involved as scientists in these kind of processes. It's a learning experience for us, but it's also an opportunity to really have an impact and shape the face of science in Europe for the decades to come. That's it. Thank you.